in Boston. So that's why I look for them to just come out and just bring it in game 5. I think they probably came in. They know what their record is on the road. They're up 2-0. They're a young team, and you have a veteran team sitting there at home, backs against the wall, desperate for a win, and the Cavs look like a different team for them. That game looked like it was over game 3 in the first quarter. I mean, I don't know what you thought, but you probably had an extremely easy night for game 3 because that game felt like it was over at the 6-minute mark in the first quarter.
Yeah, my friend Matt actually texted me and said, wow, this game is so boring. I said, not for me, brother. I love this game. There's no stress. I can sit here and watch LeBron and the other team members rack up stats, and there's no stress on me. I love those games, and we're going to have to learn how to love blowout games in the NBA because we're seeing it a lot. So, Justin, as we wrap up this series, I got to give all the credit to my guy, the way he's played, even in Game 4, another 40-plus point performance. He is now the playoff career leader in field goals made, passing a lot of guys that are really good. Now, a lot of that has to do with longevity. It's a conversation for a different day, but that shows LeBron is in the playoffs year in and year out, playing a lot of basketball games in the postseason. So, Justin, if it's me, I think Game 5 is pivotal, but I think ultimately in a best-of-3 series, which is where we're at now, if I have LeBron James and maybe half of Kevin Love and a little bit from the role players, I think LeBron will will that team to victory even if they lose Game 5 over a young Celtics team who doesn't have 2 of their superstars. But I got to ask you, do you feel like the winner of Game 5 wins this series?
No, not exactly, because like I said, I feel like the Celtics are going to win Game 5, lose Game 6, and then, it's a toss-up in Game 7. I said last week I thought it would be the Cavs in 7. So I'm going to still ride on that prediction.
Still going to ride that? Okay.
I'm still going to ride that because I think that the momentum is going to be back to Boston. They're going to win Game 5. I think they're going to go back and get beaten Game 6. Now, I do think that if somehow the Cavs find a way to win Game 5, they win it in 6. They'll go home and take care of business. They're not going to lose there. But I just feel like Boston, they showed me enough in Game 4, and they missed enough easy shots, bunnies inside, that if they made half of those, that's a different ballgame. And I feel like they're going to go home. They're going to play better. Cavs have gotten a lot from the role players. They're going to play worse. So, no, I don't necessarily think that.
Well, I'm curious. I just came up with a question just now. I sorry to interrupt you, but something just went through my head because we both agree that whether it's Houston or Golden State, I think we both agree that the champion of the NBA in this season is going to be a Western Conference team. I personally think it's going to be the Warriors, and I think the Warriors will cream whichever it is, Cavs or Celtics. So I just thought of something. If LeBron, the way he has played, as good as he has played, and now let's assume that he still has a 30-plus performance in the next couple of games, possibly even a couple triple-doubles, but Boston finds a way to win this series and go to the finals, does that put some kind of a tarnish on LeBron's legacy despite how well he played all 82 games this year and how well he played the entire playoffs? If he doesn't go to the finals, despite the fact that we think he's going to lose in the finals, if he doesn't at least get to the finals, does that somehow tarnish his legacy?
Probably a little bit. And I think it's because the lines are so divided where you have pro-LeBron people and you have the people that just don't like LeBron. And I think right now, for the foreseeable future, when all these shows are doing these conversations, you're going to have the person that's the pro-LeBron bringing up all these stats. Like, how can you blame LeBron for any of this, the way he played, the numbers he put up 10, 15 years down the road, when the next NBA player that's racking up stats and someone decides, oh, you know what, that person could be the next LeBron. And then the stats are being matched, then it's going to get into that conversation. Well, LeBron lost to a Celtics team that didn't have their 2 All-Stars. It's not going to always get brought up. So I think short term, no, it shouldn't hurt his legacy. Longer term, I think people will, because people will forget his numbers. People often talk about Jordan and, they'll talk about him in his Wizard years. I hear that brought up on different shows. It's like Jordan was, near 40 then. The Wizards were awful, but people don't look at that. They just say, if they're trying to make an argument against Jordan, they use that. And I think the same thing will be for LeBron then, where it's going to get brought up about, well, LeBron's only has this many titles. And remember the year he lost to that Celtics team that didn't even have their play. I think it'll be that type of argument. But I think that'll be more for down the road when, people are going to overlook the stats and they're not going to do the homework. They're not going to be people that probably even put a lot of effort into watching these games and understanding what was happening here. So That's just kind of my take on it.
I think that's a good point. You just said it right there. A lot of people who look at box scores, a lot of people who don't watch these games and want to have opinions on it, that's what drives me nuts. If you want to come at me with LeBron talk, that's fine. I'll take it from someone like you because I know you're watching all 48 minutes of every basketball game and you're educated and you can yell at me however you want and I'll have to either accept it or deny it. Someone who looks at a box score and then tries to tell me, well, this and that, and I'm like, no, dude, go watch the games and then let's have that conversation. We got to move on to that next series, but I had to laugh today. Listeners, if you don't follow at Talkback Justin and at Talkback Eric, and even more importantly, at Talkback Fan Talk on Twitter, you really should, because sometimes even Justin and I will banter back and forth with each other. I actually retweeted a tweet today from Mike Greenberg where he was mentioning how he believes LeBron James is one of the most underappreciated superstars of all time, to which I, of course, fawned over and said I totally agree with it. And
I threw up in my mouth.
Yeah, it was really funny because Justin threw up in his mouth a little bit. And then, so the best response on the internet, of course, and really the funniest way to handle anything is to reply with an animated GIF. And so Justin replied through our corporate account directly to me with an animated GIF. And of course, I had to reply back with an animated GIF. It was a pretty funny exchange. We have a good time with that. So please make sure you follow us on Twitter. Justin, jumping over to that Warriors series, tell us about Houston and Golden State. We've got the game on. At least I have it on in the studio, and I know you have it on in your hotel. So we've got it kind of going on in the background. But we saw some craziness in Game 3. Let's walk through that a little bit.
Well, you come off of, again, it's kind of like typical NBA playoffs now. So you come off of Game 2, Houston gets contributions from PJ Tucker and Ariza and Eric Gordon, and they look like, wow, maybe what we talked about on the show last week, maybe we overreacted a little bit. But again, they shot the ball extremely well from the three-point line. We talked about that if they had a game where they were, 18 of 40-ish from the three-point line, that would be their recipe to win, and trying to get other guys involved, not playing so much iso ball. So the Rockets actually do that in Game 2 and look great. Then they come back in Game 3, they go to Golden State, and they reverted right back to what they did in Game 1. A ton of iso ball, a lot of shots late in the shot clock, and then the guy that we've been waiting for to figure out, okay, is there something wrong with Steph Curry? Is he still hurt? Is the knee still bothering him? Is there something we're missing? He goes bananas in the second half, finally looks like the old Steph Curry, shoots the lights out of the gym, and then it was on, and it was just a rout. A 41-point victory in Game 3 for Golden State. So again, trying not to live in that world of overreaction, but boy, Eric, when Steph is on and he is right, and even when he's, not like fully just going crazy, even when he's just pretty good, the Warriors are just an impossible team, I feel like, just to guard and match up with, because it's like, who do you stop?
One of the best teams in NBA history, potentially? We'll get into that in a minute. I love to kind of needle that in there because I think the Warriors are probably a more difficult team than some of the past great champions have ever beat. Anyway.
What are you trying to say?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to say that Kobe and Shaq probably would have never beat the Warriors.
I don't care. I don't care about Kobe and Shaq. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't know if there's been a Western Conference team that's been as good as them. And even the comparisons go back to the Bulls teams. You start to think about, matchups and who on that team could guard. I mean, Rodman and Draymond Green would probably kill each other. So you could kind of cross them off the list. And then it would be basically the other guys, the shooters. And then you would have Jordan and Pippen basically versus Curry and Durant. And then all the Bulls shooters versus Clay. And then it just becomes, I think, more of a defensive game and matchups. But it's so hard because the game is so different now. Those teams back then.
Yeah, I really would love to break that down with you sometime because my friend Tony, that we talk about, he does not think the Warriors are one of the best teams of all time. And he thinks that Jordan's first three-peat Bulls would have either swept the Warriors or beat them 4-1 every time. And I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah, and it's so hard. If you go back and look, one of the funniest things to do is go back and just look at teams and just the league in general and look at the amount of three-point shots back in like the mid to late 90s versus now. It's insane. Those teams had years where they were shooting low double digits, in the teens as terms of three-point shot attempts. And now you get teams that are shooting, in the mid 30s. So it's just such a different game now. I think that Jordan and the Bulls, they would have just adapted to the game that's today. And then being able to go to the basket in the free. I mean, look at Steph. Do you think Steph Curry could get to the basket the way he does now, 15, 20 years ago?
No.
I mean, he would have been killed going to the basket as a guy of his size. So that's where you just can't compare eras, but it's fun. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But in terms of this Warriors team, just the way that they're built, and there's a lot of people that don't like the Warriors, yourself included. But for me, as someone that likes to look at the front office, I mean, Steph, Clay, both first-round picks, but they weren't the first pick taken. They weren't top 5 players. So there was a lot of teams that, frankly, suck now that just missed those guys. Draymond was a second-round pick. Almost the entire league missed on him. So they built from within, unlike a team like the Sixers who tried to tank and just kept missing on guys like Nerlens Noel and Michael Carter-Williams. And it felt like everybody else until they finally hit on Embiid and Simmons. The Warriors just hit on their guys, and then it gives them a ton of cap flexibility to go out and sign guys. So I can't hate on them for the fact that they drafted 3 superstars, and they were homegrown talent. They get the kind of the cap relief from being able to sign those guys. But, I mean, when 2 of them get it going, it's just the threat of what, for example, like when Durant and Curry got it going in Game 3, just the threat that you can't leave Clay, it just makes them a matchup nightmare. And when you played like the Rockets did, you're missing all those layups that they did. I mean, it's just a recipe for disaster. And you saw what happened. It was a 41-point blowout. That's coming off of a Rockets game where they won by 20. I mean, you're talking about a 60-point swing in one game, Eric. I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
It's unbelievable. I digress a little bit. I was actually trying to be an ass a little bit, and I'll admit it. I was trying to get you fired up by talking about whether or not the Warriors of now
I know what you're trying to do.
I didn't really mean the Lakers. Come on. We know that. I meant the Bulls. And the only reason I brought it up is because you're not sitting across the table in my own studio ready to punch me out when I feel safe bringing it up when you're in a hotel in some other state.
Yeah, I'm stuck in Florida. I'm going to get security up here because I'm getting upset. I want to break stuff in the room.
Don't send Josh after me or anything like that. So no, I digress a little bit. I just wanted to be funny, but I do think it would be fun to go through some of the best teams of all time and some of the current best teams of all time and just match them up. Just maybe some week we have a show to do and there's just not a lot going on, maybe later this summer. But I got to say, one of the things that you asked me about Steph Curry before I started this whole rant and raving and idiocy, you asked me about Steph Curry, and it was a great question because the funny thing was, a little bit of irony even, before Game 3, before he went off in the second half, I started to say to you, is Curry really like the 3rd or 4th best player on that team if you're just talking about overall basketball players? And we were kind of kicking it back and forth, and we were thinking, well, maybe that's a good question to talk about on the podcast because maybe there's something there. I mean, he had 4 or 5 years where he was just an also-ran in the NBA. Not bad, but not great. Had a couple good years where he turns great, gets paid, wins a title, wins some MVPs, wins another title. But now, the past couple years, he's back on the decline, in my opinion, outside of his shooting. Now, bar none, he is still, when he's hot, he is one of the best shooters in the league. But Justin, I think you, as a coach of basketball, as someone who knows the game, you got to at least give me some points on the fact that I've recognized that over the past couple years, starting with that Cavs series where the Cavs beat the Warriors, where he looked awful, and then the year after, even though the Warriors won the NBA championship, we all know that the star of that series was Kevin Durant. And so I feel like Curry is starting to be overshadowed on his own team.
Well, I think when you watch the Warriors and you watch the way Durant plays, specifically in these higher profile games, Durant is the guy that stands out. But from an analytical standpoint, the most important player to the Warriors is Steph Curry. When he is off the floor, and even when it's Durant and Clay and Draymond, they're a different team than when he's on the floor, even if KD's not there. So from an analytical standpoint, when you listen to a lot of NBA guys talk about some of the different analytics and points over teams per 100 possessions, they're a different team when it's Steph on the floor. And I think they showed that in Game 3, that when he gets on, that they just play at a different level with them. And I think early in his career, specifically the first 3 years, remember, Steph was injured a lot. He had those ankle problems that they just couldn't get taken care of. And by his 3rd year, I think he only played about 26 games, finally had the ankle surgery. They brought Mark Jackson in, and you started to see him at that point start to be a consistent guy that was 22 points plus a game. And I think for him, what the difference is, he's really a shooter who has taken his game sort of to the next level, where he is a guy that can get you, 5, 6 rebounds a game. He's been consistently over 6 assists for his career. He had a year where he went, 50% from the floor, 40% from three, 90%